Hey everybody, happy Torch Thursday tutorial stream. Hi Susan and Lori and ASO and everyone who is out there tonight. So yeah, my big news of the day is I have functional air conditioning at my house again. So incredibly happy for that. I mean, all of my Texas people know how very important that is at this time of year. Gosh, the poor AC technician who came to my house looked like he hadn't slept for about a week, which I am not surprised, because it's that time of the summer where all of the mechanicals and electronics are just like, nope, we done. We have worked and worked and worked and worked, and now we are taking a rest. So, I am so sorry that I abandoned all of you for the noon stream, but yeah, poor overworked AC technician who was supposed to be there between 8 and 10 a.m. finally arrived at 12:30. But I was desperate enough to get my AC fixed that I did not want to run the risk of rescheduling for tomorrow. So, sorry I abandoned you all at noon, but here we are for the Torch Thursday stream. Also, I was really looking forward to teaching that class this Thursday at noon, so today at noon, so I am bumping that project to next week. So we're not going to miss out on that particular project. All right, so what do we have for you guys today? We have this one, which I have named the Stirrup ring. So it is a ring. I've had a, people like, is that a ring? What is that? It is a ring. It's a cool kind of just modern ring. It's tube setting. So it's a piece of tubing across the top, and then I've set actually a white cubic zirconia and a black cubic zirconia into either end. I might do just two white ones today. Also, a public service announcement: when you're playing with alcohol inks, wear gloves like a smart person. Okay, don't be like me, looking like some kind of weird mermaid fungus is taking over my hands. Like,
tie-dye is in.
Tie-dye is in, but not on skin. I mean, just saying. Wear gloves. Wear gloves when working with alcohol inks. That's your PSA for this stream. All right.
I wonder if Amy's watching.
All right. All right. So let's talk tools and supplies.
Nope, I'm not. I'm working.
Tools and supplies for this evening's tutorial. You are going to need heavy wall tubing. Okay, so we've done tube setting on stream before. So this is heavy wall tubing. So heavy wall tubing means the wall of your tubing is about 0.7 or 0.8 millimeters thick. So that's thicker than your typical tubing, which is closer to, I think, 0.5 or maybe even a little smaller than that. So this is tubing that is specifically made for tube setting. So when you're tube setting, what you're basically doing is, let's see if I can find myself some space on my board. So basically when you're tube setting, what you're doing is this. You have your tubing, and essentially these are the walls of your tubing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a burr to grind out those walls. And make a little seat where we can put our stone. And no, I did not miss my calling as an illustrator. Hopefully everyone knows that by now. So you need a thicker wall in order to have enough material there to grind out that setting or that seat that we're going to do. So this is...
It looks really good.
Thank you.
I can see it better up in person, and that's why I'm peering.
I know. If I had thought that I was going to... If I had remembered at the beginning of the broadcast that I was going to do a visual aid, I would have left myself a larger space on my whiteboard. But you will, of course, get to see this in action in just a minute. So this is heavy wall tubing. It is sterling silver. I'm going to be setting 3mm gemstones. So this is approximately a 3.2 millimeter heavy wall tubing. So you want to get your tubing about 1/4 to 1/2 millimeter bigger than the stone that you're trying to set. This is obviously way more tubing than I need for my ring. I mean, it's giant. That is the only thing I find about tubing when you're buying it from most of the metal suppliers, it's a little annoying, is they only sell it in 12-inch sections. I think I've had this beef on stream before. Is like you've got to get enough tubing to last you for like the rest of your natural life in any given size. So I try and stick with only using a couple of sizes, so I'm not just overrun in 12-inch sections of tubing. Then I'm only using, you know, 1/8 of an inch off of. Though this project does use more. I mean, this uses a solid. Yeah, this is 1 inch. So this is pretty much a solid inch of tubing. So if you're looking to use up your tubing, this is a good project to do it with, or good project to help you with that. I'm gonna go with my brain got cooked last night. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. In addition to your tubing, you're gonna need something for the shank of your ring. I'm going to use, oh dear, come back here, 14 gauge round wire. There is a reason for that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You could use whatever you want for the shank of your ring, but there's one thing about the 14 gauge round that's going to make the construction of this project a little bit easier. Of course, you do need 2 stones, so I've got some 3mm round cubic zirconia in this little box here. So I'm going to be using 2 of those. And then you're going to need some easy solder. We really are only soldering, there's only 1 soldering pass on this actually. It's just there and there. There's a lot more cold work on this particular project than there is soldering. But it does require some soldering, which is why it's a Torch Thursday class. All right, let's talk about tools. Let's Allison get out her tools. Okay, you are going to need, actually I'm going to start, well no, I'll start where I always start, which is with the torch. Yes, this is my Blazer butane torch. It's my torch that I love, that I always use. Of course, everyone on stream is used to seeing that. You're going to need flux. We'll talk a little bit about what that is and what it does, of course, when it comes time to use it. You're going to need pickle and a pickle pot. I do have that off camera. Ditto with the talking about what it is and what it does. When it's time to use it, you're going to need a ring mandrel. You're going to need, I did not put a file on there. It's usually a good idea whenever you're doing something that involves fabrication that you're probably going to need a file at some point. And I know I have a file in here. I have many files in here. Okay, file. Yes. Oh, this is another tool that I forgot. Heather is prepared to defend her pickles with her life.
Well, there's only one left to defend. Maybe I can just stick it in my mouth and solve the whole problem.
There you go. See, hide the pickles. It's always a good strategery there. Okay, so please don't make the pickle cut out Heather's nose. That just looked unfortunate.
That
Anyway,
could have been better first.
going on.
Night. It's Saturday night.
It's not even Saturday night. I know. I'm just getting warmed up. Okay, so anyway, well, no one else is, Asa, so I don't know why you should feel the need. I mean, apparently we turned it into a shenanigans stream, even though it's a tutorial. Okay, anyway, continuing on with actual things that are pertinent to tonight's tutorial. All right, so torch, flux, pickle and pickle pot, your soldering surface. You are also, for this tutorial and for anything that's tube set, you're gonna need a rotary tool, okay? Rotary tool, and for this particular tutorial, you're gonna need 2 particular bits for your rotary tool. Flex shaft, if you have a flex shaft, obviously that'll work. You can do this with a straight up drill, but it's really difficult, the tube setting part of it. All right, you're gonna need just a regular twist drill bit for drilling metal. This is a number 52. Coincidentally, your number 52 drill bit is the same diameter as your 14 gauge wire. All right, so a number 52 drill bit. And then you need this little guy. This is called a setting burr. Burr spelled, I believe, with 1 R. So basically it's a little grinding bit that's shaped like a gemstone. So if you look at it, you know, like this, it's like somebody stuck a gemstone on the end of a metal stick and then put a bunch of grinding teeth on it. So this is called a setting burr. You want to get your setting burr in the same size as the stone you want to set. And these have a fairly wide variety of sizes. They usually come, I think, about 0.25 millimeters incrementally. So you can get a 3, you can get 3.25, you can get 3.5, 3.75. Yes, a quarter of a millimeter does actually make a difference when you're setting stones. You can fudge it, and I'll talk about that when I'm using it, but all in all, it's a good idea to have the appropriate size setting burr for what you're trying to set. Other tools that you are going to need, you're going to need a ring clamp. That's this right here. It's going to help you hold your ring to set your stone. You're going to need a prong pusher to do the actual setting of your stone. You're going to need some fine steel wool. I'll grab that out of my drawer in a minute. And you're going to need your pliers and a wire cutter, because you pretty much always need your pliers and a wire cutter. All right, I think that's most of the tools that we're going to need. I definitely have forgotten some, I'm 100% sure, so I will do my best to tell you what I forgot when I remember what it was. All right, I'm going to start by, yep, there's 2 things I forgot. I'm going to need a saw to cut my tubing, and tube cutting jig. So I'll be right back.
No.
That's what I said. Okay. Like I said, a lot more cold working on this one than hot working. So eventually the tool list is just gonna like invade the entire supplies list. Okay, so I have my jeweler's saw, and I have a 2/0 saw blade in it. That's 2/0. Okay, saw blades are kind of like our numerical system. So, you know, your saw blades decrease in, not decrease in size, they decrease in coarseness. As your numbers go down to 0, then your numbers continue past 0, and your numbers start increasing again, but they put a /0 behind the number. So the size saw blade that I am using is written like this, 2/0 or 2/0. So after you pass 0, your ought numbers start increasing. So 1/0, 2/0, 3/0, 4/0, 5/0, etc. Your saw blades continue to get finer. Okay, so a 2/0 saw blade is significantly coarser than a 5/0 saw blade. This is a 2/0, which is what I use for almost everything. This is a fairly expensive single-purpose tool. And I will say it works like a charm. I will also say that if you don't do a lot of work with tubing, it's definitely not worth it to pay the like $50 for this tool. But this is a tube cutting jig. Okay, so what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to easily hold and cut a straight line in our tubing. Okay, so I'm going to start with, obviously I didn't do a lovely job the last time I cut my tubing because it is really janky looking on the end there. So I'm going to grab some sandpaper, some of my 320 grit, and I'm just going to start by putting that sandpaper down on my work surface, and I'm just going to sand the end of my tubing flat just so that I have a good flat end. Like, see, I want to just be able to see how now you can actually see the wall of the tubing all the way around. That's what you want. That means that it's level, or basically even. Now I'm going to measure out about 1 inch of my tubing. Now you don't have to use 1 inch of tubing for this ring. I was actually thinking maybe I would have liked it better if I made it a little narrower, but I don't know. I think I'm going to go with 1 inch, but I think what I am going to do is I'm going to bring my sides in just a hair, because this is significantly larger than I had intended. I'll talk about that in a minute, but 1 inch of tubing, I'm going to go ahead and mark that off. Okay, and then this is how this tube cutting jig works, is there is a brake right here. So I'm just going to unscrew my brake, and that'll let me move my brake outwards. Flip your little lever back, and then I'm going to line this up so that my line that I just marked is right in that cut line. And then I'm going to miraculously grow another hand. Okay, once you flip that lever over the top, then your thumb just sits on that lever, and then you're holding, all of a sudden you go from, oh my god, I need 7 more hands, to you're holding your tubing very, very securely. So I'm just going to move the brake so that it's touching the end of my tubing, and then I'm going to screw this screw to tighten my brake up. Now, you really don't need that brake. What that is really useful for is if I wanted to cut multiple pieces at the same size, I would just leave that brake set up, and then I could just pretty easily repeat my 1-inch cut. I'm going to go ahead and load my saw blade into my frame. So when you're storing your saw, you want to store it without tension on it. So I'm just going to drop that in the top of my frame. Your saw works better if it has tension on it, so I'm just going to compress that frame, screw my little screw shut, and then it should have some good tension on it, which it does. Of course, I put down my tubing, so put that back in there. And I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold the jig in my left hand, my saw in my right hand. And in order to get the flushest, or the straightest cut possible, I will just try and press my blade against one side of this cut zone here, because believe it or not, it's actually pretty wide. And you're just going to hold and just start sawing. And if you were a proper jeweler with a proper bench, you could absolutely brace this on your bench pin. That would be the better way to do it, because it's just kind of my tubing's not going anywhere, but my hand is just kind of wobbling around like a crazy person here. So if I had a bench pin to brace it in, that would be awesome. At some point, maybe I'll actually have a proper jeweler set up in my streaming area, but today is not that day. So I'm just gonna there we go, keep sawing until it falls off. And that's gonna give us a pretty nice straight cut. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. So then I can take and that's all I need my saw for, okay? So I can release tension on my saw and be done. All right, figure out which is the side I just cut. I think that's this one. So I'm gonna do the same thing with my sandpaper on the table. Just sand that flat. Alright, so there we go. So that's my 2 flat edges. And that's probably it for my sandpaper. I might need it later, but I think I should be alright. Okay, so now I'm going to burr out the settings in both sides of my tubing, which means that I need to put my setting burr in my rotary tool, and that means I am going to have to change the collet. This is, I will say, one place where a flex shaft definitely has the Dremel flavor of rotary tool beat, because your flex shafts have an infinite chuck, so it can go as big or as small as you need, whereas the Dremels are based on this, there are different sizes of these little guys, which are called Get Out of There, you stupid thing.
It's a long name.
I know. You'd think they could have come up with something better. So these are called collet nuts, and they come in different sizes. So I'm just going to change to a thicker one because my setting burr is bigger at the bottom. I think this is the size. So that just goes in there, and then most of you probably know how Dremel works, but this has a flexible shaft attachment. It's the closest thing you can get to a flex shaft without having an actual flex shaft, and I just press this down, and then that stops it from rotating, so I can actually screw this little guy down. And I'm just going to drop my setting burr in there. and then twist it until it's tight, and then I'm going to use my little wrench to just make sure it's nice and tight, because we don't want your burr to just, you know, fly away while you are using your rotary tool. That's not good. Never good.
That's for burbs.
Yes.
Not for burrs.
Not for burrs, but for burbs. That is not wrong. Okay, so I'm going to take my tubing and I'm going to put it in my ring clamp. So ring clamp is a pretty cool little device that you use for holding, and I should use this for holding actually more often than I do because it's very, very useful. The side that I use most is the flat side. So it just has this little wedge that goes in whatever side you're not using to hold your items. So I'm going to drop my, put my tubing in there. I'm going to put the wedge in the other side, and I'm going to make sure that it's in there nice and securely. Alright, so what I want is I want to make sure that my ring clamp is holding my tubing fairly tightly, and the cool thing about heavy wall tubing is it's definitely not fragile, so you don't need to worry about it getting crushed by the ring clamp. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and start my okay. Gonna figure out why my rotary tool isn't starting. If I were gonna guess, I guess it's because it probably came unplugged at some point. Where is it plugged in is the fun question. All right, yep. It works better if you plug it in. Words to live by. Oh, Lord. Okay, let's try that again, shall we? Hey, that's what we're looking for. So this is where, I'm going to turn it off for a second. This is where having a variable speed rotary tool is really important, because if you just have this going at a million miles an hour, you're not going to be able to get a good burr out. So you want it at kind of a medium speed. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my burr, and I'm going to take my setting, and I'm just going to take my burr and just drop it into the setting and press. And I realize that that is nobody's idea of a nice noise, but I'm going to just turn that up a little bit. There we go. That's what we want. Okay, so what I want is, alright, and you know why I have it in the ring clamp? Because it's hot. I don't know if you saw the steam coming up from that, but that's from the wood. So what I want is I want to seat my setting burr about halfway into my tubing, and what that gives me is that gives me a setting that looks like this. Now I'm going to take my tubing out of my ring clamp, flip it over, repeat on the other side. Oh, right, I know. Sorry, ASO. Flashbacks to being at the dentist. I know, it is. See, Susan feels my pain. Alright, so same thing. So we have I've got my tubing here. Trying to get this at a good angle so y'all can see. Alright, so there's my tubing, there's my burr, and I'm just gonna press that down. Okay, you really do have to put pressure on that. There we go. See? Do you see that? Alright, that is my ring clamp being burned by the friction. Or, well, okay. Sorry, there were a couple of steps of actual physics I skipped in there, but that was my ring clamp being burned by the heat that is being generated by the friction of my burr against my metal. So what I have done now is I have created a setting on either side of my metal, and hopefully you are cool enough to touch. That is true. I think the iPhone chargers are one of those things that it's quite literally not possible to have too many of them ever. So that is fair. right.
Heather's not wrong again.
Heather's not wrong again. That's twice in one stream.
Whoa.
All right.
What are the odds?
Go in there. Okay, so now I have my 2 settings bird out. Now I'm going to switch to, all right, now I'm going to switch to my number 52 drill bit, which means I'm going to have to switch my collet. So let's talk about why I'm about to drill a hole while I'm switching my collet and my drill bit. So when you are soldering, fabricating, joining in general, actually, this goes for gluing as well. It's always more secure to glue or solder, etc., something into a receptacle than attaching it onto a surface. I mean, could I just solder my ring shank onto this tube? I could, but it's going to be so much more secure if I drill 2 holes and I solder it into the holes rather than just trying to smack it onto the surface of your tubing. It's just a little bit of insurance. Mechanical connections are always more secure than simply, just soldered connections or just adhesive connections. What is wrong with you?
I have a list. But I don't think we have time in the tutorial.
Fair. But what is wrong with my collet?
That is my
question. The answer should be nothing, because there's nothing in there. Something is obstructing my drill bit. It's not wanting to go all the way down into the collet. Seriously.
It's rude.
It is rude. There we go. Sometimes you just gotta shove it. Okay, so now I've got my number 52 drill bit, and I'm going to grab my Sharpie and I'm going to mark. Okay, so on my prototype, I did my holes pretty close to the edge. I mean, that's just like a 1/16 of an inch. So I'm going to bring them in just a hair, because like I said, that prototype ring turned out a lot bigger than I wanted it to. And part of that is because it's so wide. The band is anchored so, wide on the central element, and so there's all of this space on the sides here. So I'm just going to bring it in just a hair so it hugs my finger a little bit better. So I'm going to grab the ever popular boxes, and I'm going to mark where I want to put those 2 holes. So we are going to go, all right, so a little bit further in. I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch in. Okay, so there's one mark at 1/8 of an inch, and I am just going to eyeball them. So I want the other mark to be in the same amount and directly across from the mark I just made. Okay, so there are my 2 marks. Now, this one is slightly tricky. Only slightly, it's not that bad. But we want to drill a hole at each mark, but we want to only drill through this side of the tubing. We don't want to let our drill fall through. I feel like that's not in far enough. We don't want to let our drill fall through and drill through the other side of the tubing, because we don't want a hole visible up here. Okay, we're just putting a hole on what's going to be the underside of our tubing. So let's see if I can do it. I did it on the prototype, but anybody who's watched these streams on the regular knows that that doesn't always mean I can do it on stream.
I believe in you.
Oh, Heather believes in me. That's awesome. I mean, if the Heather believes in me, I can still fail, but I'll feel better about myself.
I'll still believe in you.
my drill bit is... Alright.
Rude mechanicals again?
Rude mechanicals. Also, I just hit my webcam with my drill, so that was exciting. Luckily not on any part that actually matters for broadcasting, but goodness gracious.
Better than the torch, though.
That's true. Better than the torch. Well, goodness, that's not going well at all. Let's take that down a bit. So, as I was saying when I was drilling last night, so starting it with a notch is going to be helpful, except for the fact that, okay, part of this is, I can't see this, except for the fact that you really can't do that on this because you'll collapse your tuber. There we go. So once it catches, it's easy. Okay, and there we go. Pop. And despite all the scratchy scratches, I do have a hole through only 1/2 of my tubing. And no, I can't see my screen, so I really hope it's kind of in focus. I'm guessing it's probably not. You know what I could do to fix that? I could put my glasses back on. Oh yes, it is 100% bifocals time in my world. It's unfortunate. Alright, so there's my hole through half my tubing. Now I'm going to repeat on the other side. So the other reason that what's going on right here is bad is because I have no eye protection at all. So all of those little bits and slivers of metal that were just kind of flying around could very easily get in my eye. I am very used to constantly having eye protection because, you know, without my glasses I can't see anything, except now, for the first time in my life with my glasses, I can't see anything. It's awesome. It's really not awesome. But anyway, my point here is what you just saw me do was not really very safe, was not a good idea, so don't be like me, okay? Wear safety glasses or reading glasses or glasses of some sort to protect your eye, because trust me, metal shards in your eye, nobody's idea of a fun time. Okay, now we're going to make our ring shank. So I'm going to grab my... Alright, so I'm going to grab my ring mandrel and I'm going to... Okay, so let me see. So I made this as a size 7 and it actually is a size... almost a size 8, so no wonder it's big. So I'm going to go ahead and go up a little bit and do this at a size 6. So I'm just going to put that wire, that's my 14 gauge round wire, at my size 6. And I'm going to just bend it to make a U shape, like so. And then set that on my mandrel. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off my wire. Oh, for goodness sakes. Well, first I'm going to figure out how to get this on camera. And then, alright, I've got this on my mandrel. So I'm going to cut my wire off right here, right at the top, so that my piece will be riding right across the top of my mandrel. And ideally that's going to make me, hopefully, the size ring that I want. We'll see. Weird shape rings are always a little difficult to size, not gonna lie. Okay, so now I have my ring, my U-shaped ring shank. I have my tube that I have drilled my 2 holes in, and now I'm ready to solder these together. And really, the soldering is probably the easiest part of all of this. And why it's so easy is because we've drilled these holes. So I'm gonna take my ring shank, my wire ring shank, and I'm just gonna fit it into these 2 holes that I've drilled, okay? And it should be a pretty tight fit, so ideally, if I do a little bit of wiggling, it should just kind of pop in there, and ideally it should stay. Of course, you know, we're talking about metal, which doesn't always do what we want it to do, but in this case, it did. All right, so I've got my ring shank in my 2 holes. I can try it on at this point. If I do that, I want to make sure I hold it like this, because otherwise I'm going to pop it off. And that is much closer to my actual size than my prototype ring. It's not a lot smaller, but there's not a whole lot actually of difference in ring sizes. Now, if I wanted to, I probably could size this down even a little bit at this point. Do I want to do that, or do I just not want to mess with it? I'm going to go with let's don't mess with it, because every time I decide to mess with it on stream, bad things happen. So we're going to go with...
It's meant to be that size.
We're going to go with not mess with it, and we're going to solder it together. Hi, Karen. So you could definitely use half round 14 gauge for the shank. You could use square, but it's not going to be as easy to create a handy dandy little receptacle for it there. So you would either have to do one of 2 things. You'd have to start with a smaller drill hole and then kind of enlarge it and shape it with a file to fit your wire, or you'd have to just forego the hole altogether and kind of file the ends of your wire with a half round file to give them a little bit of cup, and then solder them onto that tubing instead of having, you know, 2 receptacle holes and actually soldering them into the holes. There's nothing wrong with soldering directly onto the tubing. It's just A, actually easier, and B, a little more secure to solder into the holes. But whatever works for you, it's definitely something that is totally possible. All right, I'm going to go ahead and flux my joints, which are where my wire is in those holes that I drilled. And let's talk about flux. Flux is, what is it? What does it do? Why do we need it? Why is it important? Flux is a protectant. What it does is it keeps your metal from oxidizing, and that's what allows your soldering to work. What happens, the very first thing that's going to happen when you hit metal that is not pure, when you hit metal that's either base metal or has a base metal component, with a torch, that metal is going to oxidize. The problem with that, of course, is your oxide layer is a barrier through which your solder can't flow. So if you're going to successfully solder, then you're going to need flux. Now, do you need the same type of flux I use? You definitely do not. I use Handy Flux, which is this kind of weight pasty flux. I like Handy Flux because it is inexpensive, it's easy to use, and it has some built-in temperature indicators that also make your soldering a little bit easier, but it's not for everybody. It is borax-based, which means it is poisonous, so don't eat the flux. That's actually usually, you know, like I've said, don't eat the crafting is always a really good kind of words to live by, but if you want something that's, you know, not borax, there are lots of other fluxes out there. Okay, so I've just cut 2 wee tiny, like 1 millimeter, you can't really even see that, pieces of solder, and I'm just going to lay those at my joints. You could do this with the tweezers. I happen to just grab a little pick, so I just put a little bit of flux on it, and that's just letting me transfer those pretty easily. So there's no heat involved yet. Okay, we have yet to produce any heat other than the heat that we produced when we were burring out our settings from friction. So now, however, we are about to light our torches. That means it's time for, very briefly, my 5-point soldering safety lecture. Once again, I am not a credentialed anything as far as safety goes. There's really absolutely no reason for any of you to listen to me. I've done several very unsafe things even during this broadcast, so I really am just some rando on the internet. But that being said, I have been teaching this for about 8 or 10 years now. It's been a minute. And there are definitely things that continually come up as far as having a safe workspace in your own home and being safe when you're in a community workspace with others. So, number 1, keep 6 to 8 inches of clear space around your torch at all times. That means 6 to 8 inches where there is nothing that is solderable or meltable, like a webcam. Do as I say, not as I do. Number 2, once you've had a flame going in your workspace, From that point forward, always assume that everything in your workspace is hot enough to burn you, because it probably is. Number 3, ventilation is important. If your lungs are feeling coughy, hacky, wheezy, scratchy, or otherwise uncomfortable after you've been soldering, you may need to re-examine your ventilation situation. Number 4, if you're not actively soldering with your torch, turn it off. It's not that hard to turn it off. It's not that hard to turn it on. If you leave it burning on your workbench and it falls on the ground, that's a whole world of things you don't want to deal with. Speaking of, number 5, make sure if you are in your home workspace, have a fire extinguisher within arm's reach. If you're in a community workspace, make sure you know where the fire extinguisher is. As long as you follow these 5 simple precautions, your chances of having some kind of a soldering related terrible mishap are lessened. As usual, if you are creating a soldering workspace in your own home, please consult actual experts and do everything you can to make that workspace as safe as possible. If you are in a community workspace, please follow all of the rules and regulations of that workspace, because they are put there for your protection and the protection of others who are working there. By the way, in almost any soldering situation ever, one of the big giant rules is going to be put your hair up. So, once again, several things that are not safe. Pretty certain I'm not going to have flaming head on this broadcast. If I do, that'll be something new for the Beading Dream Stream.
It will be the first time you set your hair on fire, yes.
It's true. Also, do not have open food or drink around your chemicals. Yeah, see, I am a poster child for bad behavior on this stream. So do as I say.
Such a good girl.
I know. See, it's the devil's in the details. You got to notice the little things. I feel like at some point somebody's going to come on this stream who's an actual properly trained metalsmith, and they're just going to start listing all the things that I do wrong.
You just did, so.
Well, no, I didn't list all of them. I just listed some of them. Okay, so now that we've done the brief safety lecture, I'm going to light my torch and we're going to solder this together. So I've got my torch lit. I'm going to grab myself some sort of a pokey device. I'm going to go with a solder pick just in case I need to shove or push something. And I'm going to put my torch in my left hand. I'm going to put my pokey in my right hand because I am right-handed, and I'm going to start heating this. So I'm going to heat the whole thing. So I got my torch straight down on my object, and I'm heating the whole thing. Now, something just happened, which is my solder just fell off of my piece. I love it when it does that. Actually, I really don't. So I'm just going to put it back, and I'm going to pick transfer it because I don't want it to fall off again on the internet. So what I did is I just heated that solder until it turned into a little ball. And then, let me flip this back over. See, this is why it's always a good thing to have a solder pick handy. You have to find my other pieces. There it is. Okay. So then I'm just going to take this, I'm going to heat my joint, and I'm just going to drop that piece of solder off on my joint. So my solder hasn't flowed yet. It's just basically a little blob on my joint. And the reason that this works is because solder always flows towards heat. So as long as I make my joint hotter than my pick, my solder will migrate off my pick and it'll stick to my joint. The cool thing about pick transferring your solder is it's much less likely to come off, which is why that typically is my preferred method of transferring my solder, but it's a little bit more difficult. So on stream, I like to do this like the easier way of just setting it on there. Sometimes that backfires on me like it just did. Also, whilst you're talking to the internet, occasionally your solder will flow and you won't even notice. So what just happened there is all of my metal finally reached the temperature where my solder will flow. So you got to heat the whole thing because of physics, because metal conducts heat, and any part of your metal that's not actively being heated is acting as a heat sink. It's pulling heat away from where you're trying to flow your solder. So if you just heat your joints, chances are you're never going to get your solder to flow because you're going to have way too much heat sink going on here that's going to be counteracting the heat of your flame. So you heat the whole thing. And what I was talking about earlier about those properties of the handy flux that are helpful is your handy flux will turn clear when it's time for your solder to flow. And so you can see it did there. And then I was just running my mouth and not paying attention, left my flame on that area, and my solder did flow. What I want to do though is I want to make sure it flowed completely and in the right place. So I'm just going to put my flame on that joint again and just kind of examine where my solder is. All right, looks like it's pretty good. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing with this other joint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus my flame on this joint, and I want my solder to flow, in and around this. So I'm going to come kind of from this side And there we go. So I'm looking for that solder to melt, basically to turn into what looks like mercury and to flow into my joint. And now I have soldered my ring together. I'm going to drop that into my pickle. And that gives me, of course, a perfect opportunity to talk about what is pickle and what does it do. So pickle is a weak acid solution that will clean all of the crud. Sorry. Wow, that was just a whole rain of like soldery board bits on my head. That's exciting. Anyway, flux is a weak acid solution and it cleans all the junk off of your piece so that you can polish it and make it pretty. Or if you are doing a more complicated piece that has multiple joints, sometimes you will have to do an intermediary pickling in between joints because silver solder especially is very picky and princessy. It does not like to flow on dirty metal. So if your metal is too full of oxides and flux residue and just all kind of the junk that comes with soldering, sometimes you do have to do an intermediary pickling in order to get your metal to be clean enough to continue to solder on. Now, I may be jinxing myself by putting away my soldering gear here, but I'm fairly confident that that did what it was supposed to do. That's actually a really easy joint. That is the benefit of doing the drilling of the holes and putting the wire into the, I don't even want to know what's in there, I don't care. That's one of the things that is great about drilling those holes and putting the wire into the holes. It really does make the soldering of the joint very easy because it's essentially holding itself together, so you don't have to mess with third hands or clamps or tweezers or anything like that. So now that my piece has pickled, I can buff it. So my pickle's job is to clean all the junk off of my metal so that I have a mostly white surface. Now I yanked mine a little early because I think my steel wool is going to take most of this off. Now, if you are going to tumble this instead of buffing it by hand, you can actually skip the pickling and just throw it straight in the tumbler. But as we've discussed on previous streams, if you're going to tumble this, that's a process that's going to take a day or so. And of course, since we want to finish our project on stream, not ideal for a stream project. But if you have access to a tumbler, that's always going to be the easiest possible way to polish your metal because it is zero effort on your part. Literally, all you have to do is throw it in, turn it on, and then wait for anywhere from a couple of hours to a couple of days. And when you get it out, it will be shiny. It will look like this, shiny, shiny silver. What I'm doing now, since I'm not going to use my tumbler because once again it's a stream project and I want to finish it on stream, is I'm buffing it up with some fine steel wool. So this is quadruple zero steel wool, triple zero also works. So what this is going to do is it's going to give me a satiny silver finish. And you could also put a buffing wheel in your rotary tool and you could buff it up using that as well. Okay, so that's pretty clean. I'm not going to lie, I'm going to throw this into the tumbler after I've set my stones because my cubic zirconia will stand up to that with pretty much no problem. You do not ever want to tumble any stones that are delicate in any way. So I know my CZs will stand up to the tumbler, but pretty much nothing natural. I wouldn't put anything natural in the tumbler. I have by accident, but not, and I have on purpose occasionally, but generally speaking, if you care about your stones, don't put them in the tumbler. There's so many things that could go wrong. So the typical order of operations for something like this would be, it would go in the tumbler at this stage where it has no stones set in it. Then it would get polished. Then I would set the stones. So whenever you're doing basic fabrication, for the most part, and there are exceptions to every rule, but for the most part, your stones are always the very last thing to go in. It's, you know, sometimes they go in and out a couple times, you know, checking fit and such, but usually it's the very last thing that you do. Okay, so now I'm going to take my ring and I'm going to put it into my ring clamp so that I'm holding it like so. I think this will be better without the blocks. Once again, put my wedge in. Okay, so I've got that in my ring clamp. I do want to make sure that there's no steel wool gook in there, because that's going to mess with my setting. Get out of there. Okay, so now that I have my setting clean, I'm going to put one of my stones in there, and the easiest way to do this, and this doesn't always work, it really depends on the fit of your stone and your setting, but if these gods of stone setting are with you, you can just set your stone face down on your work surface, take your tube setting and just press down, and your tube setting will grab your stone. Okay, that only works if you have absolutely the perfect fit with your stone. So if you're like, dang it, that never works for me, it really only works for me about 25% of the time. Now I'm going to take my prong pusher, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay down the sides of my setting like a regular bezel setting. And I cannot do this on camera because you need a fair amount of leverage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 4 corners, and then I'll put it back on camera for you. So just like when you're setting a bezel setting, you're going to go in and down, and just like when you're setting a bezel setting, you want to work in opposition so that your stone stays centered. Okay. And don't push too hard like I just did, and smush your stone off center. Get back in there. Right? That's what I said.
Yes.
All right.
That's where I learned.
Don't ever do this. Hammering on stones is always a terrible idea. Except when it works and it gets the stone back where you want. But the chances that you're going to crack the stone are so high. Once again, this is a cubic zirconia. Cubic zirconia are known for being very durable, also very inexpensive. So even if I did crack it, it wouldn't be the end of the world. All right, now what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to zoom this baby in so you can see this a little bit better now that we don't have to see my solder board. So what I've done is I've just laid over the 4 compass points of my setting. And let's see, do we want a little bit more light? Yeah, let's have a little more light on that. Okay, so what I've done is now it looks more like a square than a circle. So I've pushed with my prong pusher in and down on the 4 corners or 4 compass points of that. Now I'm going to take the 4 points in between those and I'm going to press those. 1, once again working in opposition. 2, 3, 4. So I cannot get the leverage that I need having it under my camera, but basically the motion that I'm doing is I've got my prong pusher really in the palm of my hand here, and I'm just pushing in and rolling and pushing down on my stone. That's the motion. And you really do need a solid amount of force. Like I said, I literally can't do it under my camera. I can't get enough leverage. I have to have it where I can brace it against my chest. Now, once again, if I had proper metalsmithing setup, I could brace it in my bench pin as well, but I don't. Now that I've got those 4 corners down and then the 4 corners in between them, now I'm just going to go around a couple times and just lay down all of the bits and pieces that are poking out. And you're going to have to go around probably a couple of times. Because what you're literally doing right now is you're convincing a piece of straight metal that it wants to be curved. right, so that is tube setting side number 1. So now we're just going to turn this over, put it in the ring clamp. Put the other side up, put that wedge in there, and then do the same thing. So I'm going to take my other CZ, I'm going to put that face down, and see if I can grab that with the setting. Yeah, there it is. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I did a second ago. So we're going to go 4 corners. So 1, 2, 3, 4, or 4 compass points, however you want to think about it. It is important, and I don't know that this is going to show on camera. I'm going to try. It is important when you do this. That was probably a great face that I just made there. It's important when you do this that the girdle of your stone, okay, the girdle of the stone is the widest part of your stone, like in your traditional brilliant cut, it's that bit that runs right around the outside. You need to make sure that the girdle of your stone is below the level of the top of this setting, okay? So what I have here is I've got the table of my stone, which is the flat part at the top of my stone. It's just barely sticking out of my setting. You can see it there. If the girdle of your stone is not below the level of your setting, you're not going to be able to set it. So it seems self-explanatory, but it's not always. Now, sometimes you wind up with a stone that just doesn't quite fit in your setting. And the reason for this is because unless you're dealing in calibrated stones, you will very quickly, when you are fabricating, discover that 3 millimeters doesn't always mean 3 millimeters exactly. So let's talk, I'm going to work on this, and I'm going to talk to you about calibrated stones and not calibrated stones. So calibrated stones, when you see calibrated stones, when you're purchasing stones, you're probably going to notice first off the bat that they're more expensive than stones that don't say calibrated. The reason that calibrated stones are more expensive is because they are produced with very strict tolerances. So you can be fairly certain that your 3 millimeter calibrated stone is going to be within probably 1/10 of a millimeter of being 3 millimeters. You know, when you're buying stones that don't say calibrated, that is not always the case. It really isn't. I have a tendency to buy, you know, mixed parcels and off lots of stones because they're cheaper, so I deal with this a lot. And yes, I realize this is something that I do to myself, but 3 millimeters, there's a whole lot of space between 3 millimeters and 3 1/4 millimeters, or 3 millimeters and 3 1/2 millimeters. So you know, you've got your parcel of stones that's 3 millimeters, and you got your parcel of stones that's 3.25. Well, basically, you know, pretty much your 3 millimeter is going to have everything that's smaller than 3.25, but not smaller than 3, you know, and same with 3.25 to 3.5. And so then you get your 3 millimeter tubing, your 3 millimeter setting burr, and all of a sudden, well, crap, this stone's too big. There is a little bit of a trick for that when you're burring out your setting. What you can do is you can kind of move your setting burr in kind of a north-south, east-west, or west-east sort of. Don't try and stir it around, because what's going to happen a lot of times is you're going to tilt your setting burr and you're going to blow out your walls, but you just want to push it slightly back and forth, and that'll give you just a little bit of extra. That is one way to kind of fudge a stone that's a little too big into your tube setting. But thankfully for me, both of my CZs were the same size, which is 3 millimeters. Manufactured stones are easy because it's easy to cut them to tolerances, and that is my stirrup ring, and it fits me much better than my prototype. So that's it. That is it for our Torch Thursday stream. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us on the Beading Dreams stream this Thursday evening. Anybody out there who doesn't know me, I'm Allison from Beading Dreams. Thanks, Lori, in Dallas, Texas. We are an actual brick and mortar retail bead store. We are here on Lovers Lane in Dallas, open for business Monday through Saturday from 1 p.m. until 6 p.m. If you're not local in Dallas, you can find us on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream, 5 times a week with complimentary tutorials. We stream Wednesday through Saturday at 6 p.m. Central. We usually also stream Thursday at noon unless I'm getting my air conditioner fixed. I will, Lori, believe me. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna be so happy to go sleep in my air conditioning. So yeah, if I hadn't had air conditioning issues, I would have been on today at noon. And once again, I am going to be bumping that project to next Thursday because I was looking forward to teaching that today at noon. Now, for everybody out there who is interested, tomorrow evening, Friday, it's our Zoom Crafty Cocktail Hour. That means tomorrow night you will not find us on Facebook. You will not find us on Twitch. You'll find us on Zoom with our Crafty Cocktail Hour. It's a really fun time. And also, if you have any projects that you have been, thanks Karen for watching. If you have any projects that you've been having trouble with, that you need help with, opinions, whatever, thanks Excel. Good night to you as well. It's a really fun time. So if you've Zoomed with us before, the credentials are the same. We did also send out that email with Zoom credentials right before we started this broadcast. If you've never Zoomed with us before and you would like to participate tomorrow night, email us beadingdreamsdallas@gmail.com and we will send you all of the meeting information. That's going to be it for me on this Thursday evening. If you are not going to be Zooming with us tomorrow, don't forget, I'll be back on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream on Saturday with this project. This is my Ferris wheel pendant. That one's going to be fun. It involves disc cutters and drills, which is always a recipe for a good Saturday night stream. And we also will follow that up, of course, with a live merchandise sale. So everyone have a fantastic Thursday night. I'm going to shuffle on home, enjoy my newly fixed air conditioning, and work on my stream classes for next week. So everyone have a great night. Have a fabulous Friday. I know I will see some of you guys tomorrow night. If I don't see you tomorrow on the Zoom, hope you have a wonderful Friday, and we'll see you back on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream very soon.